Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for being here.
My name is Caitlin. I work with Refraction now, and I have had the pleasure of collaborating with our music crew interspersed here on co-presenting and curating our summit here at Refraction Festival. Some just notes before we start. As you can see, we're kind of arranged here in like a circle format to help us like foster discussion and conversation. So don't think of this as like a panel where there's like panelists in the audience. Really want to kind of get the juices flowing. That being said, please be respectful of your fellow conversationalists. We're hoping to like have answers around 2 minutes. We're not going to like time you, but just we want to make sure like everybody's voices are heard and everybody gets a chance to talk. So just be mindful of that when you're talking. I am going to throw it to Sherry to give a little context on the conversation, but first off, I will say that this morning we had the pleasure of hosting another roundtable session like this. It was pretty specifically focused on creation and AI, and I think some of us facilitators were just talking before that feels like a very specific conversation, and we want to kind of keep this pretty focused on like the impacts that AI has on our curatorial practice. Of course, those things like lead into each other a little bit, but just a reminder for this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be very brief because I definitely want to hear from all of you. Hi, I'm Sherry. I'm the, does it sound okay?
It's a little quiet.
Okay. Hello. I'm Sherry. I'm the founder of Water Music. How many people here have heard of Water Music? Yeah. Just curious. Cool. Yay. So for those of you who don't know, Water Music is a music and tech research organization, also a DAO, and our flagship output consists of collaborative reports where we analyze the impact of emerging tech trends on the music industry. So we've written 2 reports on Web3, one on the metaverse, and we're in the middle, just around halfway through a season report on creative AI. And so which is why we're very excited to partner with Refraction to create, hopefully, like what this will become is an IRL representation of our research process. Very highly collaborative and interactive. Definitely like a core tenet of our research thesis is that it should happen like more openly with the community of people in the industry whose careers and livelihoods will be impacted by these technologies. It shouldn't happen behind closed doors. So I wanted to like host this roundtable kind of as an introduction to that process, and want to hear all of your thoughts on the tech that we're discussing. I think if we're all here, we put a lot of value on curation. I think it's kind of like shared like understanding that we have one of the driving forces of culture, no matter what creative domain we're talking about. Also, I think as we all know, it can be used as a force for good and bad. You know, in terms of uplifting marginalized, underrated voices on the one hand, gatekeeping, regurgitating kind of inequities in various creative industries on the other. So hopefully we'll kind of cover both sides of good and bad today, and especially how technology can be a force for good in curation, but in like a more ethical way, in a way that like centers the importance of artists. So yeah, thank you all for
Thank you. I want to kick it to our expert facilitators who have so kindly joined us. Last conversation, all of us were kind of like on one side, but I've thrown y'all in the pit. So maybe Anna, Regina, and Tony, the floor is yours to say hello.
Okay, I'm Anna. My last name is Goldbrook, also. I'm the curator for something called Meta Label, which is a newer Web3 project, creating tools for creative collaboration, and also reminding people that it's cool to pay for the culture that we consume. I also am a curator for TED, so I'm the music and performance curator for TED.
Hi, my name is Regina Harsani. I am currently the Associate Media Art Curator at Museum of Moving Image. I work with all types of media art, and I'm also a time-based media art conservator, which means any artwork that's durational or involves technical components. And I work with a lot of different stakeholders across the industry.
I'm Tony. Intros. I'll just feel so self-aggrandizing in some ways, but I'm going to try my best. auction house associated with it. Before that, I co-managed Curation for a little bit of time, and before that, I worked for Spotify, which is how I think I ended up here. Worked on a variety of initiatives to support independent artists at Spotify. I think the one that is the most well known is the playlist called Pollen. And I also word vomited about curatorial governance at the beginning of this year, which also may be why I'm here. So happy to have this conversation.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for being here, and everyone for being here. I want to also acknowledge that in addition to our in-person facilitators, we also had a few folks remotely submit prompts. So big thank you to the crew at OpenAI, Brainpool, Jarvis AI, who curated the Progress Biennial this year, and the crew at New Models. So I want to kick off the conversation by reading one of these prompts from Kasia Borowska at Brainpool. So she wrote, "In the age where Spotify is often better at guessing what we want to listen to than our own selves, how can we ensure that enough randomization is maintained for people to expand their musical tastes to previously underexplored areas? Spotify, just like other media platforms, has interest in maintaining users on its platform and therefore feeding them music that has a high likelihood of being liked. Is this eventually going to lead to musical polarization of society where Taylor Swift fans will only listen to pop and country music and will never get a chance to explore the genius of Pink Floyd? Similar to flat earthers happily navigating in the digital world of flat earth facts and dreams. How can we ensure Spotify and YouTube don't contribute to further polarization of society? Instead, is it possible for us to use these platforms to navigate?" So, a lot in there, but I kind of wanted to kick it to you, Anna, because one of the prompts you submitted kind of was speaking to the threat of the algorithm, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. I know you expanded a little bit.
So, I think this comes from two directions. One is like the direction of the person consuming culture and companies using algorithms with their own interests. One of their interests being serving a listener, but another interest being retaining that listener. And then on the other side of that, there's like how that process, or like knowing that everything we consume is mediated through, like in some form is like mediated through an algorithm, whether you're doing a Google search or you're swiping on someone on Tinder or whatever. Most of what reaches us has been mediated by algorithms and AI at some point. So if you're creating, then it also works on you in that capacity. How do you like insulate yourself, insulate creativity, or protect it from knowing it needs to be optimized for different platforms or different algorithms to perform, to even be served to people. So I think there's a kind of two kind of risks with such like an algorithmically structured delivery system for culture. And I think on the platform side, I feel like Tony would have probably more insight into how this works. Sorry. but I do think that there's like the interest of a company renting you streams and also serving you music that they're pretty sure you're gonna like based on a bunch of factors. The interest of the listener listening to that music instrument and the interest of the artist creating that music are not all exactly aligned, and they can't all be served at the same time, or they're not maybe all being served at the same time.
Yeah.
How we
And I think it's super important to point out, like this kind of came up in our conversation this morning, and I feel like comes up in basically every conversation I have, is that like it was capitalism all along, like that like the interest of these big companies really like is sort of serves this like wider pool of VC monies, and like it's important to know that like none of these companies make money. Like it's a really kind of bizarre. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of like explaining like VC funding to I have to my parents, and they're like, wait, so the companies you work for don't make money? Like how is that, what? And so like I think it's like a really important like footnote on this conversation to like sort of what you're saying, that like interests aligning, that like oftentimes people are coming to the conversation from very different perspectives, but certain perspectives are going to be privileged because of capitalism. But Tony, yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about like, especially you mentioned Colin, and if I'm correct, like Colin was sort of like algo-torial.
I think it was more a response to that actually to some degree. In addition to Spotify having 3 different types of playlists as we were talking about before, which are human curated playlists, completely algorithmic playlists, which are like Fresh Finds. Sorry, let me speak up. Fresh Finds. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, the bigger algorithmic ones. Algotorial is kind of a new category.
Algotorials,
But
algorithmic and editorial.
yeah, so
combined.
that kind of where the human is feeding in inputs, but there are some parts of it that are algorithmic to some degree, rather than the inputs being purely based on the user, but there's some other third-party person feeding in inputs. That conversation is a really interesting one because I actually think if done right, all of the incentives can be aligned to some degree. I think Spotify's greatest weakness is the economic model that they chose, which I don't think people talk enough about, and it's also very related to their core value proposition. Spotify's main value proposition is competing on volume, right? Their promise to you as an end consumer is that you're going to have almost everything, if not everything you're going to ever want, and any song we're going to have, right? What that inherently means is that Spotify has no leverage over supply, right? Because they have to have everything, right? And that is very different from video streaming services like Netflix or HBO, where Netflix is not promising you that they're going to have every TV show ever made. And what that means is that Netflix says no to things all the time, and as such, Netflix has a much healthier economic model. So Spotify has a really unhealthy economic model because of that dynamic of competing on volume, which means that they have to have everything. And what that means is that music is a variable cost for that, and it's a very high variable cost. Something like 75 or 80% of all revenues immediately go out the door for Spotify to the rights holders. But I think what people also don't necessarily realize in a variable cost model is that the economics don't get better as you get bigger. There are no economics of scale at all, right? Because for every additional dollar that Spotify is taking in, they're still having to pay out that additional dollar to the rights holders, whereas Netflix is paying a fixed cost for a show, right? And then once they reach a certain number of subscribers that essentially make back that show, it's all profit for them. And as such, Netflix has really healthy gross margins compared to Spotify, about 40 to 25%. And that was kind of the thesis of Rain Snow, but I'll kind of table that for now. But I think...
See, but that plays out with how the creators of Netflix content get paid, because
Totally.
they don't, because it's like completely changed how film and TV gets made, and it's changed how well like those creative people making those shows get paid, and I think it's like shifted film and TV quite drastically to be like a much lower paying, much harder to win in creative playground for, or like just even a professional place
Totally.
for people to build and grow.
I don't know, I would love to look at the data. I actually think TV writers probably get paid more up front and just maybe less over time in like the golden age of TV. I don't know, I agree with you to some degree, but I actually think the video streaming services not having every single show and competing essentially on quality, if not quantity, right, because they're not promising everything, means that it's created like a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom to some degree, where Netflix is spending huge amounts of money on certain shows. Granted, Netflix is moving in the direction of like reality TV and documentaries that are cheap to make, so we can talk about that. But I would say there was like a 4 or 5, 6, maybe even year period where writers were getting paid, and HBO writers were getting paid, and Spotify kind of has the opposite dynamic where there's a race to the bottom. But I guess why I wanted to bring that up is because that has really interesting ramifications on how Spotify tries to make money, right? I think we can ping pong back and forth between like very big brain topics and conversations, and also very hyper-specific tangible examples. So one tangible example that I will give people that is kind of widely known, I feel like I'm like somebody could snipe me for saying some of these things, but who cares? But this this was reported in the Swedish media in the summer of, when did I join Spotify? 2017, which was that for certain Spotify playlists that are designed to be more utilitarian and designed to be background music or secondary to other activities in your life, like studying, working out, things like that. I think the most specific examples were studying playlists and like coffee playlists, like on in a coffee shop. Spotify underwent an initiative called Project P11 internally. Sounds so cryptic. Where they cut a deal with a company called Epidemic Sound in Sweden that pays a fixed cost model where they buy the copyrights from bedroom producers to score film and TV shows. And so they were just substituting that music in on those playlists where you're not really paying attention. And so I think it has really interesting ramifications on curation, for example, right? I think a lot, maybe in part because I was an economics major in addition to being an English major in school, but I think a lot of curation really stems from economic models in a lot of ways. So yeah, I do think there are new paths to be forged with new economic models, which is also kind of why I'm here today, to learn from everybody here.
There's something interesting you touched on about this idea of music as something that plays in the background of your life, which is something that really draws me to music is that you can, you can break up with somebody or get married or graduate or what, there's all these life events that happen and music can play in the background in a way that a television or a movie just can't in the same way, and I think that that's beautiful, but I think it also changes our understanding of consumption a little bit more because you can be a passive listener as well as an active listener, and those things, you're not just one, you're kind of constantly code switching a little bit. And I read something recently of somebody was referencing when you think of, when we use the word streaming now, we think about video content and audio content and online streaming, but what does a stream, what was a stream before? It was water, it was a tap that you intended to turn on and turn off, and that was a very passive idea, and it's very interesting that we use that language now when we're talking about interacting with culture as if we're just turning on a tap and expecting something to be there. I think there's something really strange about that, and it's no wonder to me that now we're all kind of, I think a lot of us in this room are coming to this conversation about curation as curators, but now with streaming, we all have the ability to turn on and off taps and choose what taps we're turning on and off. And then you could just be a listener of strictly your Spotify, what is it, Fresh Finds or the Spot Music Friday or whatever. That could be all you ever listen to on Spotify, but you're still in a way kind of curating your own
So I went to the vet and there was a curated playlist that you could play for your cat or your dog to calm them down, and it was here's a QR code, get your specially curated playlist for your cat. And I was all right, enough curation. Curation has jumped the shark. But I think it's at the vet as a medical aid, for animals. But I wanted to hop in on something you were saying about economic models defining how curation happens, because I think a lot of what I think about with curation, I've never had to curate for a playlist, but I think a lot about container design, and I think when we look at what we're talking about with algorithms serving certain economic incentives that then create cultural outcomes, that's a container. It's creating a container that then demands that it's filled with a certain type of stuff. So whatever shape you make that container, it will demand a certain kind of content. God, I hate the word content, but a certain kind of creative media to be put in there in certain shapes or formats that fit. And we all read a white paper, some of us in this room, talking about how when you're analyzing music so that an algorithm can determine how to sort it, even that, what you're able to measure and how you can measure it, the tools you have with which to measure it determine what you even care about, or
and those are man-made.
And those are human
by
made.
an individual that has a particular bias, right? And bias is
Well, yeah, usually it's someone just building
Well,
a
that's
tool.
another topic because for me, as a, I'm an art historian at heart. I don't even tend to like the term curation used for anything but someone who. I think of curation very differently than the way that we're talking about curation in this talk. Oh, I think about curation in a completely different way than it's used in this talk. I don't think about making a list as curation. I think about curation as a often multi-year long process of thinking about a conceptual topic and then doing deep research on different individuals, artists, projects, and over time thinking about that in a more like I guess I've used the term big brain way. And it is an incredibly manual process. It's a labor that's also based on education over X amount of time. So to me, like the term curation has been co-opted by things like Spotify and really like what's come with the web, which, I'm trying to become more open-minded though to this idea of the ability to curate music. Even with film, we call it film programming usually, even though at MOMI there is a film curator technically, but programming to me is different than curatorial work. But I also wanted to talk about the first question you asked, because to me, like when I was reading the white paper and thinking about this topic, maybe the solution I'm considering is too simple, and I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on this. If platforms like Spotify are so focused on individuation, it's about you as an individual curating and getting inputted data that's constantly evolving based on what you listen to, but only within this like very minuscule data set, really populous data set. What if I got a song every few hours that came from your algorithm, your data set, and it just like randomly pulled from other users on the site to pull in music that wouldn't be part of my data set? They wouldn't have to build an entirely new machine learning algorithm or system to do this. It's something they already have access to that data, and it's just like remixing it with each other. So you'd always have access to something outside of your bubble. Is this too simple, or does anybody think that this
The
is
thing is that it ends up being used for commercial purposes, like for monetary purposes. Like I feel like that's the reason I stopped Spotify for so long, because I was pissed every time a song would pop up that I didn't want, and I specifically didn't want it, and then it kept coming back, and it's like, no, this is something, a promo commercial, like it's a hidden commercial, and I feel like that's very easy to, that's what's happened.
you would feel like it's a commercial, you feel like it's a program that you would just skip the song.
You don't want,
Yeah. So that's actually a whole other topic that's very human. It's like, if I have a very narrow taste in music, and I like that I'm listening to, Nirvana only, like I only listen to that playlist over and over again. And then every once in a while it pulls from someone else's individuated list, like Bob Marley or something. And I just skip it. I go, I don't want to learn about new music. Like, are we having that conversation enough? It also didn't come up in the white paper. Like, does the average individual want to explore music, want to browse the way people used to do in record shops? Like, is it actually an interest to the average consumer?
I think most people probably find it pretty tedious, and it's a certain person that goes sonically exploring and like spends time researching and gambling and taking risks.
I know Eileen, so I just ask my students to tell me what
A lot of that comes in the tech though, and I think Spotify recently did an upgrade where all of a sudden I had a choice of 20, and I could quickly scroll through each one really fast to just know if I like it or not. And that is awesome, because that is something that, for me, I felt like finally, like I can have a choice in like what it is, and have a really quick sample as to if I like it or not, and go from there. But I think personalization is something that we're totally lacking. Like it died with MySpace, and it needs to come back. I feel like I'm so like, even looking at Netflix main page, it's like, why is it the same stupid categories? Why can't we choose what we want to see, what we want to be part of, what types of odd or other side of the world music that you want to hear? How do we tap into these?
There's almost like risk in the business model though, like serving you something you don't like, because then that, it's like when you mentioned about metrics, it's like now there's a chance that somebody's gonna like leave or, break whatever their streak is that like we're measuring based on. It's like, I don't know, you just have these like, if I do a couple different Instagram accounts or something, like think about the different set of ads you get in each direction. It's just interesting to think about like what level of risk tolerance somebody might try and like determine with algorithms for individual users in terms of like, okay, like how far, like,
How much can you piss someone off before
Yeah.
they leave.
Exactly.
And this goes into proprietarism a little bit too. It's like, have Spotify and other platforms actually already experimented with this a little and learned that it wasn't working? We don't know because we don't have access to the
Tony know?
algorithm.
I think there's a kind of,
Tell us, Tony.
I think there's a really interesting tension in a lot of what people are describing in stated preference versus revealed preference, right? Where people may say they like a thing or they want a thing, but then when you actually look at their behaviors, they don't necessarily want that thing. And maybe that's because they've been conditioned to act in a certain way. So some of that is also removed even from an individual person. But I don't know, I think there is a certain amount of personalization that happens with Spotify, but it's just lean back kind of personalization that's happening for you rather than lean forward, you being a participant in the personalization that's occurring. And again, this made me think a lot about Spotify's business model, right? And maybe economic model is not the right word, but it's actually business model, in that Spotify has an aspiration to have 1 billion users, right? So inherent in that means that Spotify is really interested in targeting a median, let's just say 50th, 40th, 30th percentile even consumer. They're not really interested in the 70th, 80th, 90, 95, 5th percentile consumer, because there are not enough of those people to achieve the business model that they want to achieve, which is competing on making money through the sheer quantity, again, not just the quantity of music, but the quantity of users. So I think that was what I was really interested in, and how Marine Snow, the company that I started, kind of started. It came from the fact that I thought music connoisseurs and let's say the top 15, 10% of people who like music were just underserved by Spotify. And I remember, again, moving from like philosophical to very tangible, I remember a conversation that I had about Spotify used to have, and I want to make sure I get the numbers right, a 10,000 song cap on the number of songs that you could like. And I believe Apple Music had 100,000 even since its inception in 2015. And I remember what that meant is when you hit 10,000, if you wanted to like a song, you had to unlike something else. And that's really fucking annoying. And I remember having these conversations internally with this guy, Jacob Schulman in particular, who was in product marketing, which is the team responsible for communicating new product features to the world. And I was saying, why don't we just change this? This is so stupid. And I remember Jacob saying, and again, the numbers may be a little off here, but only 0.5% of all Spotify users have ever even gotten to that point. So why would Spotify spend a bunch of extra engineering time? And engineers are really expensive, particularly at a company like Spotify with kombucha on tap and 3 meals a day. So why would we spend their time on something that's only going to affect 0.5% of users at best, right? And so yeah, I think Spotify is just really interested in a relatively mainstream, easygoing consumer.
So they're focused on that. So say 0.5%, 15 percentile even, is interested actually in music discovery. They want to know about new music every once in a while. But what this white paper proposed to some extent is that the danger in that, even for the layman, is there's potentially less organic social interaction with your network, humans to humans sharing music and music discovery, where maybe the layman is actually per osmosis or actually engaged in discovering new music. So are we actually losing that though? Do we all feel like we're not having conversations with our friends about new music outside of these platforms? I'm still having direct
I have an interesting point on that though. I have this thing where I think it was 2020, suddenly all of my friends were obsessed with the Cocteau Twins. Like obsessed. It was like next level. And I was like, where does this come from? Like, and I'm like, oh, it came from like Spotify and like surveying. My friends and I all have like similar music taste. But even the ones who don't, it was just funny. It felt like, I mean, and you started to see like memes on the internet of like the Cherry Colored Funk album cover. And I was like, this is crazy that it's kind of this like ghost in the machine that's like, it was coming up, which in conversations with friends, or like I'd be, you know, in 2020 we all spent like a lot of time at home, I don't know, setting people playlists, hanging out one-on-one, or hanging out in small groups, and I was like, we're all playing the same songs and we haven't seen each other, and like, or even like, I am like a very, very avid supporter, listener of an internet radio station called NTS, and there's totally like a subset of people who hear songs on NTS and then play them on Spotify, and then you get algorithmically generated playlists on Spotify that like you heard on the breakfast show every morning on NTS. Like, it's so weird how even these like human curated experiences, if you could think of I don't want to call a radio show an experience. You can think of these like, you know, human curated radio shows as kind of feeding this algorithm. And I don't know if it's a bad thing. I sometimes get a little bit annoyed when I find a song that I like love that was suggested to me from Spotify. I'm like, damn it. But I don't know if that's
To Tony's point, though, if we think about economic models of music, the radio and constantly payola in the past has always been like that. It's like you and your friends drive your cars listening to the same radio stations, all listening to the same music, even if you're in different sides of the country. Is this that much different on that level, on that social level?
I'm really curious. So in our previous roundtable conversation, we were talking about how AI was democratizing creation of music, and I'm very curious to hear like the wider group's thoughts, maybe in like, I don't know, a hand raise on if it's democratizing curation. Like, are we all becoming curators via Spotify or our Instagram pages or what we like on TikTok, or are we becoming less of that because of these algorithms?
Can I
Yeah.
follow-up question? Or just immediate access. Can you raise your hand if you identify as a curator?
I hate that word. I just,
Okay, what-
everything
It's
she
like,
said about
okay,
it,
people in the back who are
but
not
like,
raising their
but
hands,
it's
how do you
technically my
identify?
title.
Yeah.
I identify as
Okay, yes.
Because she should.
But like very few people in the back raise their hands. So how do you identify and like how do you relate to like what interests you in the topic? Just curious.
I'm an artist. I work with a lot of curators. I like collaborating with curators in the long term. Most of the shows I work on are 3-year horizon lines with large catalogs, museum traveling exhibitions. I shop for curators to work with to do that.
Anyone in the back? Yeah.
I run an art gallery, so I curate my own exhibitions. So that's a more traditional, definition. I would say consumer.
Say it again.
Consumer.
Consumer. Okay.
I like to think that like bring a label could be a good form of curation because it can really dictate the sound that you want over a long period of time. So I think like being some kind of label founder owner, that way you can be a good curator.
I think it depends on sort of how, how you define curator. Like something as simple as playlisting could be defined as curation. Like if I have a playlist called like something really basic like hanging outside drinking or something, like I'm curating the vibe that I want to hear while I'm doing that with my friends by selecting, songs from all over the internet that I think fit that vibe, and that's sort of the most basic form of curation. But obviously, like you made a good point earlier about like doing deep research and curating something over long periods of time. That's obviously, a much deeper form of curation. I think it sort of depends on how you define it. But there's a lot of different levels. Some people have a playlist for every sort of activity they're doing over their day, and then some people will ask Amazon Alexa to play music. Like apparently that's like the most common request that Amazon Alexa gets is play music. Like there couldn't be a more passive form of listening.
Can you curate for yourself though?
Why not?
I feel.
Oh,
I think so, and I mean it's up to. I feel like the word curator is as expansive as the word artist. Are you an artist because you create some work of art, however small it may be, or are you an artist because you've dedicated your entire life to it?
Well, I want to make a rebuttal to my own comment, because my comment comes from the art world. It's like how people with MAs and PhDs think about the term curation. But the idea of art curation has actually only really existed since the 1950s. It really started like in the gallery world. So even that, and that's become so like an academic way of thinking about it, is so new. I mean, we're only in 2022 now, where we have to be open to these evolving concepts. And I like what you're saying because Matt, you're thinking about it as curation having to be social. So do you have any other thoughts on that? Like why you don't think potentially?
Because short of that is just opinions. And I'm not really sure that opinions are curation inherently.
Or is all curation just opinions?
It plays into it. There's always going to be bias, right?
Well, if I can, something that I'm a professor, and so a number of my students like, oh, I don't know if I call myself an artist, or I don't know if I call this art. And I always tell them, it's so easy to conflate the word art and value as if something inherently, oh, it's a work of art. What they're really saying is that's good. But that's not art. What they're really saying is I don't find value in that. So let's forget whether or not it's art and talk about what the value in that space is as a category and how valuable it is. So like, oh, it's curated, it's well curated. Well, how and why? And so rather than categorically giving something value by using the word curated, what do we mean when we say that? What value does it add to any given situation? When
This
I'm
is
alone,
such a great point because when we think about modifiers and these algorithms for AI, whoever is feeding that is making the decision on what is the data set that's actually useful for curation. Like, I'm going to choose this image of a spoon because it's more likely that it will understand this is a spoon than something that like looks rustier. You know, I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes in that case. So that really plays into it. It's like, what is the white paper talks about this too. Like, it doesn't have a certain kind of timbre or it's spoken word. You know, Spotify doesn't. I'm sorry, we keep throwing Spotify under the bus. There's other examples. It's like they don't focus on that because maybe they don't inherently consider that music to them what defines music. So.
I also just wanted to throw two definitions of curation to the group. That's the English major in me. Hans Ulrich Obrist, this is a simple one, very famous curator that I think people may or may not know, says curating is about junction making. So it almost is an answer to that question of can you curate for yourself, maybe if you're making junctures within yourself, but to some degree there's an other in the act of junction making. And then there's David Balzer, who's the author of a book called Curationism, How Curating Took Over the Art World and Everything Else, good book, says that the curator is someone who insists on value, to your point, and who makes it, whether or not it actually exists.
As a professor, I'm good at that. I've got BS.
I guess like the perspective of like, is curation just an opinion? I feel like maybe getting back to like some of the way you were saying about research, like there's maybe an aspect of intention and reflection behind it, because I feel like there's a difference between the playlist I put together for like hanging out in the park vibes versus like the one that I put together to like be like, here's all the music that I liked this month. Like it's completely random and really just reflects no particular intention besides this is, I was just like vibing with this in May of like.
It's like, would you dance to it at someone else's party, or would you put it on at your party?
Yeah. Is curation an act of performance by that definition?
But I think there's like curation, like what you do, what a junction that a person creates with different creative media for people or for themselves. And then there's like being researched and then having AI think about you and then serve you things. And I think that that's a form of curation, but I think they're kind of different. And like they serve different incentives and models and desired outcomes and like.
Because the question of value is so different across that spectrum.
And the value
I tend
of
to
junction
think about
making.
AI as a Venn diagram of connections, where there's the code and the parameters, there's the training, and then there's prompting, but then there's fine tuning and de-biasing. And there's different people with different skill sets in each place and involved in very different values and understandings.
And then there's also money. There's like money.
Yeah, well, and when I say values, for some people it's money, for others it's not, right? And if they're curating our art and their core value is money, that's a problem.
I think that raises what's the difficult tension behind these different definitions of curator. Like it's all well and good for each person to be a curator, because in the sense that they choose things or make things available to themselves. Where it becomes fraud is curation in the broader sense of who creates access or allows others to experience something in the first place or have that availability. And that's where it seems sometimes as though with AI, the curator has just obscured themselves, right? The person in that system who is making active choices is now more hidden and less accountable and their thought process less visible because it's framed as a magic machine that's producing your playlist.
Right.
Where really there are a lot of important choices that we should be debating and talking about as desiring a healthy and equitable
What
culture.
are the 4 million parameters in GPT-3?
Well, a larger question that many of us, I think, asked in the prompts in some way, shape, or form is, look, we live in a hyper-capitalist system in the country, and if someone's starting, we all know this, and if someone's starting a company, how can they both balance proprietarism? Okay. How can you balance proprietarism, this desire for proprietarism, with actually serving people? Because it's not.
Say it again. No, say it for real.
How can you balance proprietarism with serving people?
Yeah, that's a question for them.
I'm curious, Regina, we're obviously having a very music-centric conversation here. I think we're kind of like branching off a little bit, but I'm curious, in your curatorial practice, how is AI coming into that from not strictly music perspective?
So I personally do have access to DALL-E. I think I'm one of the only non-artists that OpenAI was nice enough to give me a bunch of credits. And I get personally very in my head about using it. But I think it was actually Fabiola yesterday. I watched a performance and she mentioned something about using it to visualize installations. And I was like, this is really brilliant. This is a way that I can use it to, in the art world, a lot of curators use something called SketchUp. And it's a way, before SketchUp we made maquettes. We made physical, which are really fun, foam core and tiny little paintings or video screens in there. And they're still very useful, but now it's oh, can we use AI to help construct my gallery space that I'm working in to understand and install and then share that image with the exhibition design team. That's really useful to me.
Yeah.
So
can
I'm
you actually say to Dolly,
yeah, I'm
make
gonna
a wall
try
that's
now.
10 feet wide with 3 5x2
Yeah, actually,
images?
the more descriptive you are with a lot of these systems, like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, the better. And there's certain ways of writing things. There's actually even an entire PDF that teaches you ways that you can better write into DALL-E, which we can talk about that. Now I have to learn a new language in English just to communicate
Talk to my robot.
with this. Yeah, with the robot. But I haven't used it in a way of show me a bunch of emerging artists that are working in quantum computing and I don't want to do that because it feels, at least to me, and this is my own opinion, a little lazy, but I do see that becoming something like Google searching in the future to an extent. I can imagine, but it has to be this collaborative process where I'm still just a music producer using AI, I'm still directing that to some extent, but yeah, I mean, look, we talk about blockchain in the future. That, who knows if that will still be as popular as it is now, but AI is not going anywhere. And it's going to be used in everybody's jobs to some extent. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know exactly what it was that you said, but it made me think of Anna, in your role at TED, and I don't know how much you're able to talk about this, but obviously there's kind of I'm curious to know if you're thinking about the way that certain TED Talks go viral, and I think TED has been around for long enough that I don't know, I feel there's been a few TED Talks, many TED Talks that have reached this sort of critical mass, but I'm curious to know if you're ever thinking about certain people who might have a tendency to feed algorithms better. So.
Yeah, does TED optimize content?
Yes, essentially, yeah.
I mean, I think when you create a lot of work over the years, and I've only been with TED for years, so, I actually don't really know what our policy is on talking about stuff.
I think
You still work
about
with
whatever you
Steve.
want.
But I think that you gain insight into, you get feedback on what people are into and not into, and I think there's research, they track stats, they care about making work that connects with people, and I think that goes back to my question, my original question, which is the threat of the algorithm, knowing if content, some of the threat of the algorithm to me, this algorithmic anxiety, if I'm making content, am I making it to to perform in these situations. I'm making it to perform because that's what people actually respond to. I'm making it to perform because that's what the algorithm's asking of me. And like, I think TED has research on what people like and don't like in TED Talks. And so you see TED Talks is like shifted to be much more specific in format. They're no longer 20-minute rambling talks. They're like probably about 12 to 15 super tight minutes. Like titles are sort of phrased a certain way. You can kind of see that in like how the content has evolved over time.
I truthfully love that we've made it this far into a conversation about like curation and algorithms without talking about TikTok, but like I feel like this is to me kind of seems like the like
Gen Z uses TikTok more than they use Google.
I was about to bring that up.
To search everything.
So, but it's sort of like this like TikTokification of culture, and I know that like I think that I guess I was sort of alluding to this before, but we kind of are like all playing our algorithms in a little way, but it feels like in terms of people, I mean, I don't have TikTok, but like it seems like you can kind of play your TikTok. So if like on a Sunday afternoon you're hungover and you just want to watch like cat videos, you can teach your TikTok to do that pretty quickly, from what I understand. But like people haven't really, I think, especially to kind of bring it back to music, are like I've heard so many conversations of people being like, how do we go viral on TikTok? What does going viral on TikTok mean? Does it translate to anything? Probably not. Like the sort of like business end of that like virality of TikTok, people haven't like worked out yet. And
well, it does translate more towards conversion now than like Twitter probably or Instagram. Instagram is now basically an e-com platform with artists on it too, which is still.
It translates out because people are watching with resources, and then they step in after the TikTok hive brain has deemed something viral, and then they support it with resources. So you're totally right, but it doesn't
but
like.
brands just, I mean, it's like, just things convert. All the brands are doubling down on TikTok.
Well, it's also like, what can you do with that 15 minutes? And it takes a very highly skilled team and a lot of contextual knowledge and a lot of additional resources around an artist to translate those 15 minutes into a longer lasting effect for an artist's career specifically.
I'm interested in I feel like right now we've been talking a lot about how AI, how people are using AI to curate or how AI is influencing curatorial decisions, but to kind of go on a bit of a tangent, I think there's a big question around is art created with AI art, and sort of what does that mean for, is music created with AI music? I don't know, it was something we were talking about a little bit earlier, and I think we kind of landed on.
Are film scores created with sample packs? Film scores?
Arpeggiators.
We've already been using it.
Is there anybody who doesn't think that art created with AI is art? Or that, okay.
There is, in my opinion,
I saw your hand go up and then I was like, okay.
See, I think a lot of us are teetering on the concept of if it's art or not. I would say that music more so would be less of an art as graphics to me, because if you put your algorithms in and you kind of coordinate the bot to say what instruments you want played in what variety or style you want that played, that to me is a lot of cheating because it takes.
So we already do that. You do that in GarageBand when you're like, all right, play me a shuffle, and then you're like, I'm gonna get the choir that goes, oh yeah, and I'm like, we all know that sample.
But yeah, I mean, there's sample CDs, yeah. That's kind of the gateway.
I don't care if it's music or not. I care if it's good.
But it's good the same thing as art.
To me, of course, it's music, and also, I think maybe when we think about it as a society, even the cloud, people really think it's just this thing that exists in the sky almost, that there's no hardware involved or humans behind it. I think we think the same thing about AI. AI is not just this magical thing. It's, we mentioned a little bit earlier, it's built by a human, it has bias, it's incredibly human, and there's authors all over the place involved with that. So yeah, it's like a machine that is based off of human computing. But when we think about music or art that's created with AI, we have to think about the authors of the machine learning algorithm. I think about them as artists. So it's okay, I'm a musician or an artist on the other end that's putting a prompt into Midjourney. I'm collaborating as an artist with the author of the machine learning algorithm and the process that they've built, which is the AI, right?
And the training.
So I don't even, it's hard for me to even think of AI as a person or an entity. It's about the people. You have different.
As a musician, I don't think it's like that. I've been in the music industry 20 years ago. I won a Grammy, and I'm signed by Warner. This is nothing right now. In front of this that you have right now, that you can really get near to your client or to other musicians. About curating, I can see in some other platforms like Pandora, because I like all Latin, Hispanic music. And you can find there only one recording, the original. On Spotify, you can find thousands of the same song with other cover. I don't know how that happens. I don't know who's curating that. It seems to be that you can upload whatever there. No filters.
Anybody can cover the song.
But I also think that's
Pandora
basically
maybe has a human curating thing about quality or because it's only one record. I don't use it, but I noticed that.
I think that kind of speaks to what you were saying about like Spotify's business model is like it is this like all you can eat. You go on Spotify and you expect to see everything you're looking for there. And like I wonder if you've kind of talked a little bit about Greenstone, but does this seem like an interesting junction to talk about sort of like alternatives to what that could come with?
Yeah, I don't want to talk my own book for like too long. You know, I'm not gonna chill you.
2 minutes.
Yeah, not even like 20 seconds.
You can get a retweet.
All I'm gonna say is that I think maybe I'll raise some of the questions that I'm interested in, and people can maybe come to their own conclusions. I'm really interested in what a platform for music connoisseurs looks like compared to the median lean back consumer. I'm really interested in, if you are catering to connoisseurs, how you allow for conversation to happen around music, because connoisseurs inherently want to talk about music. I'm inherently interested in the context around music, because that is really important to imbuing music with value. There are artists that have similar sounding music but very different careers to some degree, and it's a lot about what's around the music. I'm really interested in things like game mechanics as levers for nudging people in directions they otherwise wouldn't go. I think a lot of conversations that we were having, I was thinking a lot, the most uncomfortable, and this is a slight pivot, so apologies, the most uncomfortable truth that I think we all need to grapple with is that AI is just, or algorithms are just accelerations of things that exist in the real world, unfortunately. When you're talking about being a musician 20 years ago, there was still a certain way that you had to structure a song, like verse, chorus, verse, bridge, right, to get a certain audience, right? There was still a certain amount of harmony or things like that. Maybe you had to craft lyrics that were both universal enough to reach a large audience, but specific enough where that audience feels like it's speaking to them. All of these things, anytime you're making something for other people to consume, you're going to have to grapple with these questions of how do I make not just what I want to hear, but what I know other people want to hear, and more interestingly, which is a concept that I'm also really interested in, what are the quote-unquote free market values that we all kind of default to as being good, right? I think there's a set of free market values, whether that's on TikTok, somebody being funny, somebody being hot, somebody being smart. We all kind of universally think that those things are good, and I think inherently everybody is grappling with tensions around the free market values. How much do I just lean into what I know either societally or biologically we've all been conditioned to think is good? So yeah, I'm really interested in how do you get somebody in the door, maybe using some free market values. So like a free market value we're using, I think, is one of scarcity and of luxury to some degree. Greenstone is a little bit of an aspirational product and something that you can't just enter. And people ask me, is that elitist? Yes, I think it is elitist. But I think it's a mechanic to get people to pay attention to things they otherwise wouldn't pay attention to. And I think that's really, really, really important, right? The minute you tell somebody that it's scarce or that there's a wait list and not everybody gets access, they're interested no matter what it is. And then you can focus that beam of interest on things that they otherwise wouldn't be paying attention to. So that is really what I'm interested in at Marine Snow in a lot of ways. I'm really interested in focusing on the top 10 to 15% of music lovers and creating a system of levers that are coming from the free market values to direct attention to things that may not otherwise have received that attention. That I think in the long run, which we can talk about, also have a lot of value. Inherently, we haven't really talked at all, and this is, you know, there's so many different rabbit holes you can go down with this conversation, but we haven't even really talked about like time. When you were talking about curation, it was really interesting to me. You were mentioning years of research, getting an MFA, getting a PhD. So there's time on the curatorial end, but then there's also time on the consumption end. And that, what time period are you deeming something to be good? TikTok, it's like 15 seconds, so it has to hit you right. But even a song maybe is 3 minutes, and you may think it's good now, and then 3 years from now, you were like, how did I ever listen to that, right? And what I'm also really interested in is music and art that stands in as long of a time horizon as possible, because I have maybe a naively but optimistic perspective that the best or works that transcend the free market are able to have value in the long arc of time, right? Like, people know the story of Helma Half-Clint, right? Like, nobody knew who she was really when she died. She was like really the foremother of surrealism in a lot of ways. Am I right about that? Is that, you tell me.
Yeah. The Guggenheim show years ago.
Yeah, but what was
the first time.
But people recognized her as she was like
Abstract.
the abstract, yeah, exactly. Thank you, abstract expressionism. But she was like way ahead of all these dudes that everybody had looked previously to say that they were the ones who started it. But I'm a big believer. It kind of sucks to be recognized when you're dead. But at the same time, I think there is something beautiful about that in a way, because she did her own thing for like 30, 40 years. She kind of went in the wilderness in Sweden at times. And I'm really interested in people who are just making work that is meant to be viewed in a really long time perspective. And if I remember correctly, she viewed her work as such even when she was making it.
So rare. Most
yeah.
of us are like, I'm never going to be acquired by a museum. It's like, you have to think that way.
Totally.
But what's important about your point is it highlights the importance of curation by people who have experience and pattern recognition over time. Like, it takes time and thoughtfulness to recognize who is going to stand the test of time, what works are going to stand the test of time. So the question is, can machine learning algorithms, can AI replicate that? Is it possible? Or is this just an argument for why humans are always going to be needed in this collaborative process with AI?
Can I ask you a question? What does it mean for a song to be outside of free market values to you?
I think it's never a binary. I think there are songs that have certain elements that are very aligned with, like, and free market values just mean like traditional expectations in some ways as well. I think it means to me to be saying that this thing or this concept has value when others may not think it has value in the overall landscape. I'll give you like a very tangible example that I'm thinking about a lot right now. I'm really interested in critically acclaimed music, and to me that means music that stands in the long arc of time. The Cocteau Twins were making music 40 years ago, for example, and it's now buzzing. And so I'm really interested in critically acclaimed music, but this is not like profound, but so much of what we deem critically acclaimed is mediated by English language and English language media specifically, right? Like, what is critically acclaimed is often what is in Pitchfork and Music in the New York Times, whatever the case may be, John Caramonica, amazing music writer, The Fader. But that's not representative of the world of music, right? And I'm really interested in how do we highlight works from countries that we just don't listen to music from. If I were to ask you, who's your favorite Tunisian artist? I think, no, like, unless you're from Tunisia, and if you're not from Tunisia and you have an answer to that, that's sick. I'm really interested in how do we bring those voices into the equation, and I would argue that today those voices are just not in the free market system of values at all, and maybe and I'll just close
our
it.
free market because we're in like an English
Totally.
language-based culture.
Totally.
Because I think there's like the All African Music Awards.
Totally.
There's like other sources of like based in different
For sure.
local zones that are.
I guess I mean global capitalism.
But yeah, global capitalism.
When I say like the free market, and I don't think the Tunisian voices are being recognized in the system of global capitalism. Or maybe just to give an interesting example that I'm thinking about literally right now. Korean music, so much of what we perceive of as Korean music in the West is just K-pop. And there's so much more Korean music, and there's so much more underground, electronic, interesting Korean music. I don't know if people have seen Seoul Community Radio on YouTube, for example. It's like as good as Harbor Lynn or anything like that. And I'm really interested in how do we pull the artists that are making music that's meant to be viewed in a long time horizon, who are in Korea that are not part of BTS or like Blackpink. But that's an example to me where that requires actively going against the grain of the free market, which really says right now that Korean music equals BTS or equals Blackpink.
I feel like we're circling around this question, which I think you might have actually put as your prompt in our BTS little doc that we had, which is like, how do we define what's good? And I feel like this also gets at what you were talking about, of just how do you make something good? And I think like I'm come from being classically trained violinist. I was in a band. Our song that was on the radio does not have a chorus. It's an anomaly. I don't know what happened. Yeah, but like you spend a lifetime honing a craft. But craft doesn't mean that you can necessarily write a song that just touches people or a hit song. And then there's like working with, let's say, AI or programming beats. Like not everyone who opens up Ableton can just like drop a sick beat in there and fuck it up. Like a lot of people make stuff in Midjourney that just looks like Midjourney, just looks like more Midjourney stuff. So I think like there is an element of choice making and skill and like and refinement and like you make choices every step of the way.
Particularly, right? To me, that was it.
But I don't. Yeah, I think
if
like
I do my music with Midjourney, it will be Midjourney's music, and it will sound like Midjourney. There's some other algorithm that doesn't work that way. It's more free. It happens the same graphic design or whatever.
Yeah, but if you have access to feeding the data set, like when you're using Midjourney, you're teaching Midjourney. You're not just getting results from it. So you are actually changing the system for everybody.
You also
it's still like not like anybody walks into Midjourney and makes a masterpiece. No one picks up a violin and suddenly is. Like, you could be the best violinist in the world and still be kind of a terrible artist just because you can execute pyrotechnics. So I just think it's, for me it's taste. It's classical. But I think for me it's taste over technique. Every time when you can marry taste and technique, it's like, then you have like Freddie Mercury, you have Frank Ocean, you have like people who have all the chops and can make the taste happen. But like, I think you can apply that to like high craft, you can apply that to programming, you could apply that to feeding prompts, like sort of you're abstracting like I'm actually playing the notes myself, the vibrations are coming out of something in my hands, I'm telling a computer the elements I want it to do, I'm generally giving overall instructions to a computer to put cues together of some kind. Like I think like you still have to make good choices. At least that's a theory I'm working with.
Thinking about the overlap of like music supervisors, like in movies and like instead of workers.
Can you speak up? I can also.
That made me think about like Wayne's World, right? And they bring in Bohemian Rhapsody, which was like not a single at all, and it was like
giving something context gives everything. Anything can be good with context, and that's why curation is important. So music that's not part of our culture can really, if you ever saw Step Brothers, all of a sudden there's this aria that you've never heard in your life, and because Will Ferrell's singing it, all of a sudden it becomes part of something you know, and when you hear it in a restaurant, it makes you think of that movie, but also you can have it in your life. So I just think that's what curation is. It's bringing
The most recent example that actually also brings in TikTok is Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill on Stranger Things. Not only joined the Gen Z zeitgeist, but it was #1 on the Billboard charts for weeks, right? Maybe you know how long. Yes, right. So how can we incorporate more of that discovery, and not just within this platform that you built, which is amazing, but for everyone?
That's why MTV made such an impression on all of us.
What's that?
And then it went straight towards reality TV.
Right. Well, that's it. I think all of this is going to your question of what makes something good, and the answer is whatever makes something good, it's a social process of making it good, and it always has been. It doesn't matter the technology, it's always going to be about a certain conception of what is good that is then disseminated, oftentimes by elites and through systems controlled by them, and that is reinforced in the way people are taught and the way things are talked about in certain organs and structures. All of the structural stuff is always going to win at the end of the day in the competing competition between levers of technology and system. But then the question is, okay, well then how do those systems feed back into those and expand our conception of what could be good thereby? And how do we make more of those accessible to more people, or present them in a way that people can understand and inside of?
I'm so stuck on this concept of good though, because I sometimes drone and atonal music. We think about it in the art world, like John Cage or Tony Conrad. These are things that most people would never think is good unless maybe they spend a lot of time.
Unpleasant but brilliant.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in the subjectivism though aspect of it. So
I like some John Cage.
I think, well, first I would say the notion that if you make Midjourney only Midjourney, the assumption there is that art hasn't always already included intertextuality, other people's tools, other technologies, building on other people. Every form of art has always already done this, has always used some form of technology, some form of language that we're speaking back with, some kind of social performance. I think theater people understand this a lot better than musicians and artists do, because they're all always collaborating with other people's texts, other people's directions, other people's words. But I think also the subjective and the objective, to me, curation is context. And that's where value comes from. And so, if Duchamp stubbed a urinal in a museum 10 years earlier, or was someone else, or did it 10 years later, it wouldn't have made a fucking difference. But then, at that moment, by him, it changed the fucking art.
And also partially because it's rejected, right?
Yeah. Well, and then he was on the board,
goes back to your
right?
point of things being rare and you know.
But it also needed to be presented by an institution and it
100%.
written about, and then our sense of it has changed. And in terms of Cage, you could hate Cage, but if you say Cage isn't art, then you immediately branded yourself as a Philistine, right? That's again, you have to. There's a cognizance of what it means from one's position, etc. To like or
end this
not like.
panel by performing 4 minutes and 33 seconds
Oh.
Just one of the moments.
Just kidding.
I kind of have a question because I'm hearing a lot about access, opportunity, what pieces of work have the opportunity to even go through an algorithm. A lot of discussions around TikTok right now, people are where's the best chance for me to get discovered? It's TikTok, honestly. It's pretty much been, common knowledge is a dangerous word, but a lot of us believe that it is kind of the most egalitarian algorithm, that you have a shot of ending up in front of people. So my question to kind of all of you with experience in curation or maybe have some knowledge of the algorithms as well is and knowing that, of course, humans are behind these things and that systems affect the access or what has an opportunity to be seen, but do we have a shot in making something less biased outside of a human picking songs?
I just found 4 minutes and 33 seconds on Spotify.
It's playing right now. Well, I mean, so one of my
Like, is that the
prompts-
goal, I guess, is like my question of like, because there is one goal of like, say what you want about Spotify, 100,000 songs come in a day that go to a centralized point, dirty word, but it's true, and it comes out the other end, and we can all actually find something to listen to. Like, that's insane. So if the point is just organizing, fine, but like, my question to all of you here who work in this field, is the ultimate next goal, like, can we make more access or less bias? Is that what people are
Spotify
thinking
doesn't
about?
care about that though, because that's not lucrative. But if there was a platform that cared about that, the white paper talks a little bit about locality, and there's this concept of hyperlocal, which is focusing on your direct community, your direct city, or direct town, maybe like the club that you go to hang out with your friends. And how can you both like contribute to like their labor? It's labor. If you're involving yourself with that process and introducing new music or new art, like it's labor. So how are you compensated is a question that I don't know the answer to, but it should start, in my opinion, with these like hyper-local communities, because that's where you're going to get that diversity.
What's the question?
If,
In like one sentence.
like if kind of a part of like this discussion about AI curation, like what's the goal of using AI? Like, is there a goal in mind? Like, what are we trying to use the tech to further that's already been happening in society? Which I agree with. Like, as a songwriter, Lord came out, every brief I got was give me Lord, until Imagine Dragons came out, and then every brief I got was give me Imagine Dragons. So like, yes, we were already, being fed.
I think to bring it back to your question of how do we hear more Tunisian voices if we're not Tunisian or we don't have access, probably one of the coolest things about TikTok is the way that it will every so often drop you into a completely different world. And like I'll never forget sitting on my couch and it's like, okay, it's like Bama Rush talk or whatever, absolutely not sheer nonsense. And all of a sudden I'm in someone's prison cell watching them cook dinner with a heating element under their metal bed. And it was like, I mean, I've never felt more, it was one of the most powerful experiences I've had with technology where I'm like, I've been brought into a context that is so deeply different and alien and alienating to me and to them, and I'm connected with them. And I don't want to overstate that because it has changed nothing about my situation or theirs that I had that encounter, and yet the power of it was inescapable. Now, to your point, there's not a lot of incentive for TikTok to produce more of those experiences except for people who are already disposed to them or whatever, like, want that from it. But it was a glimmer of what if you could every so often get a window or pull a card or get a door to something you had not planned on that could really change your perspective. And then it's fine, it's back to, people doing viral dances or whatever. Like, it could go in a number of directions.
That was my first thing I said, and then the response is that people get turned off and there's a chance you'll lose retention on TikTok.
But I think there's a difference between like the like transnational, international business of serving people music, and then there's like how people actually live life. Like the distance between you hearing a song as it like floats by you on Spotify and noticing it and then even identifying what artist it is, and then going, I'm gonna learn more about this artist. Oh my God, they're gonna be in my city in 4 months. Oh, okay, I'm gonna buy a ticket. Like, there's so many steps and so many layers of doubling down and like activating. And then also, it's really different. Like what I listen to in my car and in my room is really different to where I would maybe even feel comfortable or feel cool hanging out. Like when you're actually putting your body in a place and not just like privately consuming things in your little snow globe at home, like it's just such a different experience. Like you want to be with people who excite you or feels good to be around. And I think that moves. It's like when you move from your private listening experience to like a public thing, you see everyone come together at like the big music festivals and stuff, but I think in those more like individual show experiences, like a lot of that has to do with our identities and our communities and who we want to be around. And I think that's where you see community come together. And it's not in the algorithm. And I think it's a lot to ask of an algorithm to create local community, but I think it's not a lot to ask of people who love and consume culture to think, okay, well, if I spend $15 a month renting music on Spotify, maybe I should also spend the $50 on the tickets to see this artist that I heard because I love them. And maybe I should also just give that artist some money for something, buy some merch, buy an actual like vinyl record, buy an NFT, like just do something directly that says, I've consumed your work and I appreciate it. And then also to answer the question of how should we learn about Tunisian music, because I can't let this go. Does everyone here know about radio?
No?
Yeah. So it's this website, it's radio with a bunch of O's at the end.com. And you can look at a map of the world, and it has like a bunch of amazing music, especially in Africa from different decades. And you can say, I want to listen to Tunisian music from 1970 to 1979, and then it drops you into a fucking banging playlist, and it's so good. Or I want to listen to Algerian jazz.
There's also Forgotify.
Forgotify?
Yeah.
Forgot.
It's
Yeah.
a little bit more random, but you just put it shuffle.
So there's like.
Can I
least played music on Spotify?
Can I just push back a little bit on that? I'm really interested in what is good Tunisian music, not just Tunisian music.
But I would say radio is pretty curated.
But I guess my point is that if you were gonna like, imagine the alternate perspective. You're in Tunisia and you want to know what good American music is, and you typed in 1990s like music in America, you would just get the top 40 radio. And there's much more than that. And what I'm really interested in is, to some degree, what do people in those communities think is good, assuming that radio is a little bit more top down and there's somebody somewhere saying that like these are just the biggest Tunisian hits, and that likely is the economic model.
I think
I'm
it's,
curious.
I think it's sorted by genre, and a lot of it is like jazz, 1970 to 1979, you know, like in Tunisia, or rock, and you're like, wow, I didn't even know this.
The weird thing though, as an end user of radio, and that I've used maybe 2 or 3 times over the years, I forgot about it until you just mentioned it again. Why am I not using it every day? I don't know the answer to that question, but like maybe because
you have too much choice.
Retention.
Can I just say that so the radio thing is crowdsourced. It's all uploaded by people that are also members of the site, which is a big community on that site. And what was cool about it was you can say America, you can say South America, so by country, by decade, by year, but also there's 3 things. There's slow, fast, and weird. Those are the categories for it. And it's free, so it's a very cool service.
I guess what I'm talking about a little bit though is there's an inherent tension between like hyper-categorization and like notions of good. And what I mean by that is the more you just drill down on exactly what you want to fulfill, the specific demand that you have is at a specific point in time, is the more you remove the context of what other people have determined has value. And that is really what I'm trying to figure out. Paula, in the playlist that I worked on, was intentionally cross-genre. And I think to some degree, the only way you can really begin to talk about what's good is being as universal as possible in the conversation. And the minute you start to drill down on 1970s Algerian music, it's sick, don't get me wrong, but that to me is not really reflective of the social process that somebody was talking about of how we construct what's good.
I'm not saying radio and their model is like the way to know what's good, but it is a different way to approach.
Totally.
Like sampling different music from different cultures and learning and doing it in a way that's organized differently, and literally you see the location it's coming from.
I think it's a great example.
I think it's
There's
just
something about like what I feel like sort of you mentioned with the TikTok thing or with this radio, like all of that is effectively like randomization. Even if you're saying I want to go to like this continent at this time and listen to weird music, you're getting at something randomized. You know, whereas what you're talking about is something like hyper specific.
I think the what's good conversation, I shouldn't have said it altogether. The what's good conversation is separate from, hey, radio's cool.
Totally, I like
Hey, radio's cool. I stand by radio for
sure.
But the what's good conversation is
of course. Yeah. Just I think like we're talking about like a spectrum of something that is very like valid and very like we're kind of talking about this like spectrum of value, spectrum of like curation, but something that's striking me about both of the like this sort of what's striking me about the spectrum is it has like it's sort of like machine unlearning. It's not you know like it's like trying to get machine or like get algorithms or get people to kind of not necessarily learn about our tastes and learn about what we like, but like almost like spit us out something random or something hyper specific, but that we had never thought of or never heard of before. And I don't know. I think that was sort of like the thread.
It makes me think of like why do I don't know this person. I've heard that why AI chess beats human chess players is because it can conceive of moves that are like outside the realm of human strategy and imagination, and that is like, that's where potentially AI curation can have a meaningful value beyond what a human spending their entire lives as a radio DJ, for example, can do. That is to introduce something that is fully random or a blend of things or a new synthesis of sound that a million people a million times would never have originated. And then what we do with that is kind of up to us and whether we like it or not. But like that, having that be the end goal, to think about end goals, feels really valid and worthy. Having it subsume people's active participation, either as consumers or as DJs, that's where I think it's way, way, way more fraud, and we're going to keep kind of turning back into corners. We have this, and it was better, and it's actually going to be fair. It's like, yeah.
Do you mean like the computer, like, you're going to like this? You're like, I don't think I will. But like, trust me. Or after you listen to this and then this, you're going to love this?
I mean, like, I would fuck with an AI program that could combine TikTok videos in a totally novel way that I can't even perfectly describe to you now and play them back to me, because that would be a synthesis of human material that not any human one, either individually or collectively, could have produced.
Like creative and collaborative production,
right?
Which is what a lot of artists who use AI see in it, talk about it, and then what you're talking about is kind of AI selection to serve you and consumption more than anything else. And I think creators and consumers, there's always some form of each and both, but it's a different process that we like attend to in front of the computer. The thread I was hoping to put on earlier though was like you mentioned NFTs, and I find it really fascinating that at this moment we have these twin technologies of AI and blockchain, where I think the most powerful thing about blockchain is DAOs, is where we give money to learn things we didn't know before. Like I have, I bought NFT Season 0 of Refraction. I'm a founding member. I love coming to Refraction Festival, hearing music I've never heard before, seeing artists I've never seen before, being surprised by what I like and can't even explain why I like it, and then I have to ask, why I like this. And then we've got AI on the other side of that, and I think there's a there to these two technologies emerging at the same moment, where there's this hyper-capitalist space of trying to make us consume more of what it thinks we like, and then there's this space where we can support our local communities and work together to make something different. And I always found, like, I first came to blockchain thinking I was gonna like make fun of it and make a critical intervention, like, seriously, I came to it like I have a history of making like net art that makes fun of the internet, and I came to it and I was shocked by finding these amazing progressive voices that were trying to use this libertarian-based monetary platform to make a fucking difference.
It came up so quickly in our conversation earlier. We were talking about collective intelligence and sort of AI is this sort of collective intelligence made concrete. Like it's, you're literally like feeding and training models with collective intelligence, but collective intelligence exists beyond AI. Collective intelligence is like a part of being human, and that very quickly lends itself to conversations around like collective wealth, collective benefit, collective like risk and reward. And I think I had never, or not never, but I hadn't thought about it in such concrete terms, is that like I feel like so many Web3 people involved in Web3 and so many people involved in AI production are the same people, or kind of having the same conversations. And it had always remained a question to me as to like why that was, but to me this sort of like collectivism seems like good.
That's good.
It's interesting to think about like what you were saying about maybe like the organizational frames of like goodness and taste, because like the top 40 reflects a certain selection of that. Or thinking of like I'm on a group chat and like somebody was like really not into the music that was here last night, but I was like, I'm not like it. And how that is like what is timeless in Tunisia, like not just for the 70s, like what is considered those timeless things, and like what different groups do, and that's maybe why it's interesting. Or like once I can figure out why I like certain songs and stop getting it wrong, and figure out like what are those like elements of weirdness or things that I really like resonate with, and how I can like recognize that.
How do you do you have a framework, or like how do you think about curation for Marine Snow?
I have an answer to the question of what is good that we use as a company, which is our goal is to sign artists because all of the songs on Marine Snow are exclusive. We pay upfront for 90-day exclusive windows, so you cannot listen to any of the songs on Marine Snow anywhere else. And I think that's part of getting people in the door, just like how video streaming services, if you want to watch Curb, which happens to be my favorite show, you can only watch it on HBO, right? And that's how they get you to sign up for HBO. But the phrase that we use is that we seek to sign songs that are historically, critically, or culturally important, and we can talk about each one of those three things, across genre, geography, and time period. So I'm really interested in critical importance, and to me, that means, like we were saying, people who care deeply or have spent the time and put in the work, what do they like? I think that tells you a lot, not just like what does the layman or layperson care about, and I'm really interested in that. And I think, maybe just to connect the dots in a few conversations, I think there are versions of algorithms that could be more closely aligned with those kinds of models. I think you would have to change the economic model. So Marine Snow is free right now, but is a subscription service, which has very different economics to app-based platforms, which we were largely talking about. And if you look at the history of Spotify, Spotify's model was actually built to be an ad-based model, and then they kind of just realized that they needed to be on mobile, and then they kind of realized that they could charge people to be on mobile, and they grafted an ad-based cost model on a subscription-based revenue model, and that's partially why there's all of this incongruity on Spotify. So we can talk more about that, but I'm really interested in, for example, and this is not a perfect example, and if there's anyone here with a PhD or from academia, they will be very quick to correct me. Nothing is perfect in that world, but I'm really interested in like the H-index, or the equivalent of the H-index. Right, if you were to look at Jennifer Doudna, who is the somewhat widely acknowledged inventor of CRISPR, which is gene editing technology, you don't measure her impact based on the number of people that have read the CRISPR paper, right? Otherwise she would be like in obscurity, right? But it's her influence on science as a whole, and if you were to look at the H-index of Jennifer Doudna, and what the H-index is the number of papers who cited her papers and the number of papers that have cited those papers who then cited her paper, right? And building a family tree of influence is really what I'm interested in. So, and I think you can do that with technology. I have a feeling that you can do. Nobody's done it yet.
I think you can do it now, but I think in the future, if anything, if you set up a system, you're like, these are the outcomes, eventually someone's gonna be like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna become the world's best thought leader, and I am going to get myself cited 8 billion times. Like they'll make
totally. There's
they'll make content to game the system.
To be honest, like that's exactly what happened with the H-index too. Like it's imperfect.
Yeah.
There are many who will like write papers specifically to be cited.
And it's not to debunk
right?
it.
So
It's
that,
just like
I'm going to write
like
one
people,
sentence. It's not
humans-
new research. It's not
humans
anything
got
different. I'm
human.
summarizing these other people really well so that I will be cited. But it is still a good system. Like it's not.
Can I just say one thing really quickly? Is that you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? No system is going to be perfect, but I think it can be an improvement over what we have now.
Ask for a PhD to talk.
Right? But I guess my point is, I caveated it by saying that I know it's not perfect, right? And I don't want the critique to immediately butt all of these things. I guess my point is that there are concepts that have yet to be introduced into other curatorial arenas that I think have value, largely about influence and family trees of influence. That's the whole point.
We're talking about that in like the blockchain sphere, very much so, and it's kind of interrelated.
Can I throw out one thing, just an add-on? It's not a but, what you're saying, which is that there are arguments within research-based departments around things like, well, but grants are better than H-index. Well, but my output and like I haven't been cited, but I produced the thing that was used on this chip. And what does the H-index look like for an artist? And so I think if you find that model, you might be able to flip it back into academia because
I think it happens natural on Africa right now because communities and people, they like their artists, and then these labels or whatever, they pick them up and raise this thing. That is, I think it's the only place that is happening, like as you say, that communities approach to their own music and embedding commercial, and that would be probably a way.
I can give you a couple of things from the engineering side. The machine learning, the AI that wins the chess games is different from curation. I have worked in curation exactly. And that curation, that machine learning, extract features, right? They're trying to simplify the song by the rhythm. So that creates a conflict when you try to add richness to the curation. Because on one side you're trying to simplify, and then when you try to add richness, it becomes that's one. Regarding the thing you want to do, like the Ergos number, representation, stuff like that, I'm sure I understand the point. You don't have to be perfect, but there are a bunch of papers that show that most of the citations come from 20 universities in the United States.
Totally.
So it immediately, over time, went to that.
Yeah.
Right? So there are ways to
increasing returns.
Yeah, to fix it, but look into that. They're looking into that now. It's last 2 years how to fix it. But don't stay on that. There are more. Try to be broad.
Oh, I agree. I guess when I say that, I should also caveat by saying that I believe curation is a multivariable equation. It's never going to be like one number is the single source of truth. It's about combining a variety of different points of information, right? So, yeah.
So, do you see it? I'm hoping to ask this question in a non-binary way, but do you see it as an add-on service? So, like, it would be someone who also had a subscription to Apple or Pandora or whatever. And where do you think that customer base lies?
Yeah, yes, I do. I think my personal thesis is that music is going to move in the direction of video streaming in a variety of different ways. The first is content differentiation, that different platforms are going to have different pieces of content, the same way that every single platform, it's 100% different what they have. The second way that I view music moving in the direction of video streaming is that if you look at the data, 70% of Americans have more than one video streaming service subscription. And the reason why is because of that content differentiation. There is a little bit of a pushback now, and it is an ebb and flow, right? Unbundling and rebundling, right? People are like, cable was $85, now it's great that I can only pay $15 for Netflix, but now I have 6 subscriptions and they cost just as much money, right? So there's always an ebb and flow. That being said, I think people have the money. Maybe that's a controversial statement, but if you look at what people who love music, they spend about $400 a year on music and music-related goods. And if you look at Spotify's average revenue per user, it's $60 a year. So that implies there's like a $340 delta to some degree that is currently manifested in the physical world. And I'm really interested in why people spend so much money on physical products, like maybe going to a show, than they do digital. And I think it's because digital products offer a set of values that are not really captured. Physical or offer a set of values that are not captured by digital, namely a sense of community, right? You get to be around people who care about what you care about, a sense of social status and identity, right? You can post DOS on your Instagram story like I would have if I was here and be like, yeah, I fucking love DOS. Yeah, I'm cool. Yeah, I love DOS. I've seen DOS like 3 times in the past year, which is sadly why I didn't make it, because I wanted to see 2 South African DJs who rarely perform in the US perform. To touch on some of the things that we were talking about earlier. So I'm really interested in community, social status, but also scarcity. Digital music is like overabundant, in my opinion, and that's contributed to the devaluing. It's commodified, essentially, in some ways. And so the platform that we're building, my goal is to have 1,000 songs in steady state, which pales in comparison to the 70 million songs that Spotify has. And we're also building those songs to be exclusive for limited windows, so for 90 days. So it is only on the platform for 90 days, and then after that, it kind of disappears into the ether.
I find that problematic, and maybe that can bring us, if we have time, to talk a little about data ownership and all of this. There's so many subjects we're not going to be able to touch upon. But my first thought when you mentioned the exclusivity on your platform is there a physical media element? Because we're really lost that with a lot of these platforms and streaming. Like you call it renting. I love that. You kept saying renting music from these platforms. I never heard someone say that before, but it's a licensing relationship. While previously when we had a VHS tape or a Blu-ray or if you don't have the ownership of that media, from an archiving perspective, that's problematic. It's even potentially from a social archiving perspective, that's problematic. So is there a physical media element that you'd be offering to people who are involved so they can actually have like a USB? So I guess people aren't buying CDs anymore of this stuff. And what is the implications of this widely for our relationship to AI in general that's constantly data mining all of us and our information?
I think you could, I actually agree with you, believe it or not. I don't think, though, that it has to be physical for you to own it, and that's actually kind of what I'm interested about blockchain and stuff like that. But I think you could also very simply offer a download. And the model that originally we were thinking about, which was very related to the blockchain Web3 world, because Marine Snow actually predates a little bit, not that much, but a little bit before these concepts were in vogue, was just having a 90-day exclusive streaming model, and then you buy the download after. And the metaphor that I use all the time is, it's like going to the gallery and seeing the works. The works are only there for a finite period of time, and you're only there for a finite period of time. So when the works leave, if you want the memory of those works, you have to go to the gift shop and buy some sort of collectible, whether that's the postcard, which is the cheapest version, or the coffee table book, which is maybe the medium version, or the print itself. But I think those questions are actually like relevant to tangible art as well, right? Like you go to a gallery, you don't own it, but you can own something that allows you to keep the memory of it.
I have an interesting thought with that. Like, what if you are lucky enough to experience it in that month, you can download it, and then you just base your payment on how many downloads are allowed at a time. Because then you can, if you were lucky enough, you have it in your downloads, you don't have to do an extra payment, but then you're going to want to have a lot in your archive eventually, so you pay for storage that way as a cloud system. That's a way to not have to buy something extra like a doubt.
I want to jump in because we only have 10 minutes. As you can hear, we're getting kicked out because the party's about to start. I think the data ownership thing is really interesting, and maybe I kind of want to kick it to Sherry and Sarah and you, Alex, who've been taking notes through the session, because it's something I think is really important. Like we've been circulating some amazing ideas here, and this has been I think really interesting discourse, and I want that discourse to leave this room. I don't want it to stay in here with all of us. I want it to go out into the world, which is why we're hoping to organize some key takeaways or kind of common threads from this discussion. And Sherry, I know you have a question, but then maybe we could come up to that as well, just because I'd love to get to that.
For sure. Yeah, I had a question just to pose it to the wider group also, just to try to get a general vibe, based on this discussion, based on how you all interact with curation and with AI, based on your goals as curators, or maybe as consumers of curation. I think this is at your problem. Do you feel like the algorithm is a threat? Is AI good? Is it helping your goal? Is it hurting your goal as a curator? Just would love to hear from the group as well, especially people in the back. If you have any, especially based on people's input.
I mean, I can reject what the algorithm says at any time. I think it's a tool, it's great, but I can reject it if I want to and say, okay, well, if that means this, why did it mean this? And then that can lead to branches, branches of different things that I can find or look for. So ultimately, I can say no. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, sure.
I think the algorithm rejects me. Since I went against the music industry, so I'm not anymore there.
And so it's not, I'm saying it's mutual.
Yeah, there is a mutual disrespect.
Yeah.
We utilize the algorithm as a unitary thing when of course it's not.
Yeah.
Because there are algorithms like what Spotify uses to drive monetary profits. One purpose of it is algorithms that are using that sense of different inputs to absolutely other things. I'm thinking of what we were talking about earlier about leveraging social networks to find new work. And I was thinking about these very show you that one, and then you go a layer further in the audio field and look at the collectors that collect from those artists and what they collect, and so on and so forth. And I think that's like, there's no monetary model there. It's just finding the work. So there's different algorithms. It's not one algorithm. So I think there are different experiences and interacting with a variety of different things. So.
Yeah, Pathfinder is the name?
Pathfinder.
Cool. Okay.
Close that.
Yeah.
I think Adam said about like having that kind of spontaneous moment where you're using the algorithm and you find something new. Like I think that spontaneous innovation, like sometimes people get that from like traveling or like meeting people, but now you get to do it in the afternoon at home on your computer and just like get that on demand. I think that's a good thing.
I mean, my opinion isn't fully formed on this, but I think the algorithm, I would consider the algorithm a friend, mostly because it is just a tool, and as an individual, it's up to you to find what you're interested in, and there's a lot of ways to do that. NTS Radio, I think, is a good tool for that, and so is just talking to your friends and asking what they're listening to, and a lot of the music that I listen to now, and a lot of music I discover is just through trusted friends sending me stuff. And the algorithm is sort of just another tool to find suggestions, and then if I hear something I like, look more into that artist and maybe the record label, and then maybe other artists on the record label. So, and I think, before there was AI and algorithms, like how were you finding music? It was all the other tools I just mentioned through like friends and, crate digging and stuff you can still already do. But I think it just offers, like you said, it's just another tool that I can always reject if I don't like what it's feeding.
I have a terrible response. The real algorithm were the friends we made. I mean, on that note.
Yeah, that's so fancy. Mic drop.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's a really nice place to end the conversation. I feel like I know y'all have been taking, a few people have been taking notes. We'll kind of distribute those in some sort of way. Do y'all feel you want to do like a little rundown of key takes? Get right up.
Sure, yeah, I can start. First of all, this was incredible, and I really appreciate us taking the time to challenge the meaning of curation, because it feels like one of the biggest buzzwords. So I really like how we spent a portion of the conversation today focusing on how we should define algorithms, curation in the algorithmic age, and framing it from that perspective. I also think we can, for future discussion, take a look at what the future of music discovery can look like as well, that reflects whatever that type of curation may be. We also talked about machine algorithms replicating human curation and whether that's possible. And then also, just asking ourselves these sort of more existential questions. Does the algorithm actually empower us to become curators ourselves, and does curation exist? And then looking at ways and strategies, to help us kind of answer